Welcome back to Tomorrow on Track. I'm Pauline Lum, and today we're talking about one of the big constants in life, taxes. Despite its name, taxes are not just a concern for businesses, but for everyone. The reason is simple. The revenue generated through taxes contributes to the services and infrastructure essential for the well-being and progress of our communities. Joining us is Puan Rosnita Ahmad, Chief Officer of Tax Policy Sector at the Inland Revenue Board, Malaysia. Puan Rosnita, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Pauline, for having me here in this show.
Thank you for being here with us today. It's really interesting. So much has been happening. We have a lot of information readily available, and I'm sure you're also very familiar with this interesting case that happened quite a number of years ago, but still very relevant today. And that maybe sets the tone for our conversation today. So if you recall, there was a company that came under a little bit of public scrutiny for not paying enough taxes. And when I say public scrutiny, this was from their consumers. They felt that this organization, despite being very profitable, had not paid enough taxes, to the point that they actually took to the streets and boycotted this company. Now, this was interesting because of the reputation and because of the pressures they felt, they did decide to come forward and volunteer to pay a little bit of tax. Now, I think the interesting point around this was taxes being the lifeblood of a country. People may not fully realize how much of that goes back to the community. So I'd like to maybe get your view in understanding, what do you think the level of awareness is of our rakyat when it comes to paying taxes?
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah. Whether you're paying the right amount of tax, that's the issue at hand. How do you know that you're paying the right amount of tax? That's one of the concerns here. I see that taxpayers are actually looking into. For example, throughout the years of Inland Revenue Board of Malaysia, there is an increasing trend of payment of taxes, especially now installment payments, be it from individuals, corporates, and other categories of taxpayers. Why has it been increasing? So definitely it falls down, maybe it goes into the industry itself, the performance of the industry. So although it's an increasing trend, whether taxpayers actually realize that they have been paying the right amount of tax. Even IRB has this challenge of whether they are actually complying with all the tax regulations and tax laws. So going back to the company that you have mentioned, whether they have realized they have been paying the right amount of tax, when there's this sentiment of the public is boycotting, then they just want to declare how much amount of tax that they should have paid. So taxpayers should have that realization of when they pay taxes, it goes back to the community. It goes back to the rakyat. Where you have public schools, public hospitals, there's also subsidy wages that was offered. So where does the money come from? So it's from the taxpayers themselves. So from here, we can see that the government actually plows through the money to the benefit of the rakyat, to ensure that whatever mechanics or even initiatives being done to incentivize when there's situations actually occurred, taxpayers should benefit. And there are a group of peoples that actually would benefit, for example, for women returning back to work after a 5-year break, that they need to come back to work. So government say they would incentivize companies that actually employ. So how do they incentivize? It's not actually a tax break, but that's where the incentives comes in, whereby the money is actually from the taxpayers' initiatives by paying the right amount of taxes. So that's how the government actually give in back to rakyat. So that's how people should understand how does this way of paying taxes work. So that's why, to me, this is where governance comes into place. Inland Revenue Board is looking into all these aspects, not only auditing or investigation activities throughout the years. I mean, we have gone through the self-assessment phase, and we go and audit whether you have complied with the laws, whether you have put in your written forms correctly. So we have gone through since 2001. So now it's already 2025. Whether we should go into an advanced checking or no more looking into your accounts, maybe looking into your controls. So to me, IRB has to go to that further step in the taxation phase now.
No, thanks for that, Puan Rosnita. Quite a lot to unpack there. So I guess with the company that we talked about, I think the hue and cry from the public was really because they felt that not enough tax was being paid, and whether they're tax experts or not, that is another question, of course. But I think the correlation is really, to your earlier point, how are taxes actually being pumped back into society, into community, and is there that level of awareness by Rakyat in terms of where the taxes are actually used, right? And we need to strike up that kind of balance to make sure that the revenues of a country are sufficient to support the needs and the growth of a nation, right? So whether we think about subsidies, whether we think about a knowledge transfer, whether we think about incentives when we bring different things back to countries so that we can learn and generate employment and the whole scheme of things. But maybe, Puan Rosnita, what is not so clear to a lot of our listeners today is when we talk about tax corporate governance, from revenue's perspective, what does that mean? And then we'll link it a little bit back to trust, which is one of the points that you also brought up earlier.
All right. Okay, this tax corporate governance program that we have actually introduced was way back in 2022, whereby we have announced this program for pilot companies. Why did we start it off with pilot companies? Because we wanted to see whether the companies that we choose, or even who come in voluntarily to this program, whether both parties are ready for this program. So that's why we have started with a pilot. And interestingly, those companies that we have offered, majority actually agreed to join the program. But the first hurdle I see here is the trust deficit, like what you have mentioned. Inland Revenue Board, we are always being the authority of, like what I've mentioned, the audit activities, investigation. We are more on that kind of tax authority people. When we introduced this program, there's a bit of thinking of these taxpayers saying that, is IRB going to change their mindset? See, that's the problem here that I see. Because we are no more looking into your accounts, whether there's a proper debit or credit, whether there's actually unreported sales, or even overclaiming of expenses. So we are no more looking into that in this program. In this program, actually, we are looking into the controls of the company. How is it being cascaded down on the decisions that have been made, on the approvals that they have gone through for every transactions? And how does all the business units communicate with each other, especially in the tax element? There must be a tax element from the beginning of a transaction, which that is barely being done by all the companies or industries themselves. So when we introduce this program, we have to actually put the trust as the main factor for us to break that. Taxpayers and tax authority, we have to ensure that taxpayers would open up to the tax authority on all these processes. and on the decisions by the board especially. How is it being done? So to me, this is very different activity that is done by Inland Revenue Board itself. So for those 7 pilot companies that we have approved, to me, it's a very successful story that we can share with everyone, because those 7 actually had that trust with the tax authority. Although in the beginning of the phase, they had some problems and issues to open up to us as well, especially when we go through documents on the approval, on the controls, and when we start asking questions on the level of approvals, the level of the authorities of approvals. They were like, are you actually doing an audit with us again? You see, that's where we had to actually say that we are in this learning stage together. This is our first time looking into your controls as well, so bear with us. We had to do that. But during the session, we had actually had a very good one, and both of us agreed upon that this should be the way of checking of controls, and we try to actually apply with other companies apart from the 7 pilot companies to have it like a template. So if you look into our guidelines and also framework, we have actually matured from the first that we have issued until now. So at least there's a clearer guidance to the taxpayers who wants to join into the program.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think it sounds like it's a journey for both sides, right? I often like to say 2 sides of the coin, but everybody's still walking down the same direction and taking that leap of faith. And also listening to you, Puan Rosnita, thinking about tax corporate governance, it sounds to me that we're now sort of like elevating tax into the boardroom, because you're talking about how can an ecosystem, an organization's ecosystem, actually support the requirements for accurate tax payments and tax reporting. So we talk about the controls. So I guess what we're looking at here is embedding it into business process.
Yeah.
So you have multiple stakeholders understanding what is the requirement, so that you can have these accurate conversations, right? So I guess let's just pick up on the point around the journey and the change in mindset, and that links very much to trust. I think cooperative compliance is that trusted relationship that people are building between taxpayers and tax regulators. And it always starts with the first step. And we see that in the global landscape. And of course, now Malaysia has also successfully, awarded to 7. And I think that will continue, right? So what are some of the actions that you can share that revenue is also taking to enhance trust? We often talk about trust deficit, and looking at the shift in mindset from an audit investigation into something that's more process and governance driven.
First challenge I see is that to change the mindset of our officers themselves. Because when we started initially, we had to train the officers of IRB, of the Inland Revenue Board. Like what you have mentioned, they are always in this hat of auditors and investigators. So to us, we need to ensure that going through the process of the tax corporate governance on the 7 pilot companies, we had to actually learn together what is the level of checking that the officers need to go through. And they had to make sure that they are not actually conducting an audit. But in the first stage, we had to have our auditors themselves to conduct this corporate governance program on the 7 pilot companies, because we had to have our own KPI to achieve. So the same auditors are actually conducting a normal audit to other taxpayers, and at the same time, they are also conducting a corporate governance file. So to them, that is a very challenging tasked for them to conduct. So when we have finalized the 7 pilot companies, that's where we have actually decided to form a specific unit to conduct corporate governance program. So these officers are dedicated to look into the controls, governance checking of companies and also those which are interested to join in this program. So this is a bit different from what we have conducted before. But at the same time, this specific unit, besides conducting new companies joining into this program, they are also looking into those 7 pilot companies that have joined because they need to do an annual review. So 3 years of annual review because there won't be any audits or investigation to be conducted once you join into this program. In these 3 years, the auditors of Inland Revenue Board who does this corporate governance will be looking into the documents that is submitted annually by those companies that have been approved just to check on if there are any new transactions. If not, there will be just a simple review to say that nothing has changed. They have followed to whatever that we have put into the conditions of the approval of the corporate governance program. Then they'll just breeze through the 3 years. Unless if there's any restructuring, if there's any other new transactions, then they have to come in and declare, because this is self-declaration. So that's where we say that there's that trust to be embedded in this process. You declare and we will accept whatever declaration that you have made just to counter-check on what are the differences or changes that have occurred. Then we will just approve to whatever changes that have been made and we will just discuss together those changes and whether they are appropriate and following in our regulation and laws. That would be it. Yeah. So that's how we actually make sure that the auditors would have that mindset of looking into controls instead of looking into the normal documentation of audits and investigation.
Right. Great. So it almost sounds like as companies are preparing to become part of this program, it's almost like a courtship.
Yeah.
Right. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy. And when everyone is quite happy with where they are in that at that space,
yes,
in time, then that's where they take the plunge and then they get married, right?
Right.
So I suppose with marriage, you would want that to be forever and not just for 3 years. So I guess the question then becomes after the 3 years, and if I'm hearing you, you would naturally continue. So would it be fair to say that you potentially are not going to be looking at any audits as long as you are upstanding, you have a good ecosystem to support tax reporting and the accuracy of data, you perpetually may not have any tax audits, right? Would that be fair to say?
Correct.
Sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Of course, notwithstanding changes along the way.
Correct. Correct.
So I guess maybe one last question, and I think this has been really interesting, understanding the process and where revenue sits on this. And it's a great program. And I really feel is an opportunity for tax now to be elevated into boardroom conversations. What is the benefit of being part of this program and having all these disclosures? Right, just maybe in a couple of sentences. Yeah,
I would say there's clarity. Clarity is the big word here under tax corporate governance. Whatever taxpayers do in their filing in of their tax returns every year, they need clarity. Because there's always this dispute between IRB and also the taxpayers themselves, even reading the law itself. We would have different understanding. So that's why we have loads and abundance of case laws in our special commissioners and also in the High Court. Why? Because there's no clarity. So with this corporate governance program, taxpayers would be very sure to what they have filed in is being accepted by the tax authority. So I've received a question before, Pauline, before this to say that I've been complying every year. I've filed in my tax return form. I've done my tax installments, and I've not been audited. So why should I enter into this program and declare myself? I've been very safe all these years. And why should I incur cost for this corporate governance? Because it's quite costly to them, they said. I said, you can just wait and see if you don't want to join this program. But until the time comes, tax authority would come and audit or investigate you sooner or later. So if you want to have a peace of mind, to have a very good night's sleep, to me, join into this program, right? You have clarity there. And yes, whether Inland Revenue Board would agree, they won't be auditing or investigating perpetually. To me, Inland Revenue Board has gone into that level of maturity. You don't actually need to go and investigate and audit everyone anymore. There should be a group of taxpayers that are already matured and they are declaring the right amount of tax. So IRB should not be looking into those group of people anymore, taxpayers. Go and focus on other taxpayers who are not complying. So those are the words that I just want to tell everyone here.
Thanks. And I guess not a sell for revenue, but there are deductions available up to 50,000. Maybe that might change in the upcoming budget.
Yeah.
Who knows? That's on my wish list, that's for sure. And I guess I think the point of clarity is very important because there is nothing that is certain in life, right? Apart from death and taxes. So I think it's always a good thing if we can have a better viewpoint on some of these areas. So I guess in terms of all this great stuff that is happening, do you foresee that this might become mandatory in the future? We've just gotten over e-invoicing, and then stamp duty, self-assessment is on the horizon. So lots of priorities in the minds of in-house tax folk.
Right.
So it's about also looking at what they can do with the little resource that they already have.
Right. So, yeah, definitely to make it mandatory, it will take time. Yeah. Because like what you have mentioned, we had e-invoicing, we had the self-assessment for stamp duty and RPGT, and we had global minimum tax to be implemented as well. So that's quite a handful for taxpayers already. So we tend to have maybe this few years until maybe 5 or even 8 years to have it voluntarily, for companies to come in voluntarily. Maybe later in the 10th year, we might want to look into those specific companies, maybe large taxpayers, to become mandatory. Yeah. So at least it has matured. To me, if the program goes through 10 years, that should be a very good time period for us to assess and see whether we need to make it mandatory. As for now, it is still a voluntarily basis.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks, Puan Rosnita. I mean, if I'm hearing this, hearing from you in terms of how the revenue is getting the Rakyat and Malaysian companies on track for tomorrow.
Yeah.
If I can just summarize, I think one, we're looking at how we're pulling things together. So there's a lot of discussion with taxpayers that are coming forward. Hence, there has been the evolution of the guidelines. And to the point around whether it will become mandatory, it's about having something more mature in this journey, and therefore potentially maybe in 10 years time. So you heard it first here, right? Tomorrow on track. Okay. And I guess the other point is learning from others to facilitate that trust, because it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And the openness of listening and collecting all this information. So I think with that, that's been really helpful, Puan Rosnita. Thank you for your time and insights. I've been speaking to Puan Rosnita Ahmad, Chief Officer of the Tax Policy Sector IRB Malaysia. I'm Pauline Lum, and this has been Tomorrow on Track.